It's one that reflects the depth of affordability challenges facing tenants while recognizing the real pressures that owners continue to face. The motion passes.
Eric Adams has raised the rent 9%. That's the most since a Republican was in City Hall. You know, the last Republican.
You have become maybe real estate's first martyr.
Oh, okay.
When you stepped down from the Rent Guidelines Board, that really got people's attention.
In a major victory for Mayor Mamdani, the Rent Guidelines Board approves a rent freeze for nearly 1 million rent-stabilized units. But landlords call the process a farce.
Today on California Reports at 9:55 on a Thursday morning in June, a landlord attorney named Christina Smyth sent a letter to every reporter covering housing in New York. She wasn't a bystander. She was one of 9 people who decide once a year what happens to the rent in roughly 1 million apartments. And 8 hours before the biggest vote of her tenure, she quit.
Yeah.
So just to recap sort of what goes on the board, I knew the week before the vote what the vote was going to be, right?
How do you know that?
Because the chair has an obligation to cobble together the votes for what she's been told to promote.
Her letter didn't read like a resignation. It read like an accusation. This year's outcome, she wrote, had been decided the year before on a campaign trail. Everything since, the hearings, the data, the public testimony, had been theater.
I will now call for the vote. Arpit Gupta?
Yes.
Brandon Mancia?
Yes.
Lauren Melodia?
Yes.
Sagar Sharma?
Yes.
Sina Sinai?
Yes.
Adon Soltran?
Yes.
Maxim Nguyen?
Yes.
Chantella Mitchell? Yes.
That night, the other 8 members met anyway at El Museo del Barrio in East Harlem in front of a crowd that had been building toward this moment for months, and they voted 7-1, 0% on 1-year leases, 0% on 2-year leases. For the first time in the 50-year history of the Rent Guidelines Board, a 2-year lease got frozen right alongside a 1-year one. Roughly 1 million rent-stabilized apartments, close to 2.5 million New Yorkers, not a single dollar of increase for as long as 2 years, starting this October.
The motion passes.
Here's the number that should make you pause. That same board publishes its own measure every year of what it actually costs to run a rent-stabilized building. Fuel, insurance, payroll, repairs. This year, the board's own staff found those costs rose 5.3%. The board voted for 0.
The Rent Guidelines Board, or RGB, voted to allow increases of 3% on 1-year leases and 4.5% on 2-year leases. Mamdani, who campaigned on a promise to freeze the rent, has appointed a majority of the RGB's current members. Some landlords believe the RGB is caving to political pressure.
If you tip the scale and you pick these people, it's like a baseball team, baby, right? You pick your players to win the game or lose the game.
Some landlords say that a rent increase of about 5% is needed, expressing ongoing complaints about the increasing costs of owning and maintaining property in the city.
In fairness, the other side has a real number too. Net operating income. What's left after those costs rose about 6% citywide by that same board's count. Landlords on average are not drowning, but a citywide average hides a lot. It folds in newer buildings that opted into stabilization voluntarily. It leaves out major capital repairs. And in some pockets, including parts of the Bronx, income went down, not up. So which number tells the truth? Maybe both do for different buildings. That's the tension this board was supposed to resolve with evidence. Smyth says it didn't.
Well, Mayor Mamdani launched his historic campaign in that freezing water at Coney Island, proclaiming that he wanted to freeze the rent as well. People loved it so much that they elected him mayor. And now the Rent Guidelines Board will determine what people will pay living in nearly 1 million rent-stabilized apartments across the city. That board today hearing from both tenants and landlords. 6 of the 9 members were appointed by Mayor Mamdani. So will they help him keep his pledge to freeze the rent?
Buildings with rent-stabilized apartments saw their revenue increase by more than 6% last year.
To understand why she believes that, rewind to before a single person sat on this year's board. Zohran Mamdani ran for mayor, promising over and over to freeze the rent. He ran a marathon in a shirt that said it. He jumped into the Atlantic Ocean on New Year's Day to make the point. And on the campaign trail, he said something more specific than a slogan. He said he'd only appoint people to the Rent Guidelines Board who understood that landlords were, in his words, doing just fine.
Enough of this running commentary. I just finished this race, but the real marathon's just getting started.
He won. He took office in January, and in February he appointed 6 of the board's 9 members, including a new chair. All 6 of his appointees voted for the freeze in June. Is that unusual? Every mayor appoints this board. De Blasio froze rents 3 times using appointees of his own. Appointing people who share your views isn't against the law. What Smyth's letter alleges is different, that this board didn't just lean a certain way, it arrived already knowing the answer, and then treated months of hearings and data as decoration around a decision that had already been made. That's the legal line she says was crossed, and it's the reason a Staten Island courtroom is now involved.
Here's what's coming up tonight on Inside City Hall.
This city's more than 2 million rent-stabilized tenants deserve a rent freeze.
Mayor Mamdani announces 6 appointees to the city's Rent Guidelines Board, bringing him one step closer to delivering on a campaign promise to freeze rents for stabilized tenants.
So what we put forward was what we characterized as actions of last resort. I described them as last resort because we have a broken property tax system in this city. We have one that can barely stand up in court. And my goal is to reform that system, to work with partners in state government.
Now, the easy move is to wave Smyth away. She's a landlord attorney, of course. She says the process was rigged. A tenant group made almost exactly that argument, calling her comments disingenuous. That's fair to test. So test it against someone with no reason to agree with her.
Let's switch topics. The mayor said that he's made 6 new appointments to the Rent Guidelines Board. This looks like a layup. I mean, property taxes is hard. 6 appointees who he pretty publicly said, I understand you're independent, but I hope you'll reach the right conclusion.
Yeah, I looked over the list, and I have to say, it was I suppose there is some precedent for this under de Blasio, but like when the landlord representative is from a nonprofit subsidized housing group, it gives you an idea of how exactly he's stacking the deck. And of course he's going to. It's his power. No one else has any say over the appointments. So I think we can be confident that they will reach a rent freeze in June when they take the final vote on the Rent Guidelines Board. The question is, of course, so many have been asking over the last couple of days is...
Arpit Gupta is a finance professor at NYU, first appointed to this board by Eric Adams. He cast a lone no vote on the freeze. And the day after, at a public forum, he said something that cuts against Smyth's strongest claim. He told the room that, unlike in past years, he personally observed no interference from the mayor's administration in how individual members decided. No smoking gun, in his account, but Gupta didn't defend the outcome either. He warned that freeze after freeze, without any plan to lower landlords' actual costs, through property tax relief, insurance relief, something, could quietly starve older buildings of the money they need for a new roof or a new boiler. He said he'd asked his fellow board members a direct question: under what conditions would you ever vote for an increase? He said he didn't get a clear answer. His word for what's coming wasn't rigged. It was a slow burn.
The reality is the government is there in the background controlling all of it. The government controls the insurance system. It controls the insurance regulations, which lead to high amounts of liability issues that are causing lawsuits that are spiking the insurance rates. The government controls the property taxes, which Michelle doesn't have to pay in her units, but account for about 31% of the expenses of rent-stabilized buildings overall. And Furman Center has done great work highlighting the inequitable burden that those property taxes fall on rental housing in general and rent-stabilized housing in particular. You have the water board, which has been mentioned, which is government controlled and also sets. So the government controls all the costs, or many of the costs that building owners face. And yet they put this board and then they give us some mandate to translate these government set costs onto burdens for.
So line up what you actually have. A board member who quit says the process was theater. The board's own data shows costs up 5.3% while rent moved 0. The mayor promised, in public, before appointing anyone, exactly what kind of members he wanted. He then appointed 6 of 9, and the one member with the least reason to defend Smyth says he saw no interference, but also isn't sure this board has any circumstance left in which it would ever vote yes on an increase. None of that proves the vote was rigged. All of it explains why a judge is now about to read City Hall's email.
Among those chanting on the steps of City Hall was Nathalyn Flowers, who about 10 years ago was evicted from her apartment because she could not afford a rent increase. She landed in a homeless shelter.
5 years in a shelter, it was pure hell.
Flowers was finally able to get a permanent place to live thanks to a housing voucher as part of the city FEPS program. Last year, she became a big supporter of Mayor Zohran Mamdani, who pledged to expand housing vouchers and drop a lawsuit brought by Mayor Adams stalling the program's implementation. What is your frustration with the mayor right now?
He's not keeping his word. He's not keeping his word. I thought this was an honest man.
What is the point of electing super progressives if they abandon the most needed in the most significant of ways in the city's budget process?
On September 2nd, a Staten Island courtroom will decide whether the public gets to see those communications. If the messages show coordination, this becomes a story about a board that stopped being independent in anything but name. If they don't, this becomes a story about a mayor who won an election by promising an outcome, appointed people who agreed with him, and then watched that outcome happen, which legally might be exactly how it's supposed to work. Either way, roughly 1 million households are living inside the answer. Whether or not they know the question is still open. A rent freeze and a well-maintained apartment are not automatically the same thing. One is a price. The other is a building somebody still has to have a reason to take care of. If you want the next update the moment that hearing happens, subscribe and turn on notifications and tell me in the comments which piece of this changed your mind, because I keep coming back to the same image, 9 chairs, 8 people, and a letter sent at 9:55 in the morning because one of them already knew how that night was going to end.